Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with my friend Marc Tancer. Am I pronouncing it right, Mark?
That is correct, Warren. You're
Right.
right.
So, Mark is a libertarian activist. We're going to talk about the libertarian candidates you can see on the bottom of the screen who are all running for president. But before we do that, I wanted to get into my favorite topic, which is self driving cars. I think the libertarian perspective on self driving cars is important. I think the Republicans and Democrats don't have a coherent perspective on self-driving cars, where I think the Libertarian Party does. Mark, you're a libertarian activist. You've been involved in the Libertarian Party of Florida and more for years. First of all, tell the people a little bit about your libertarian involvement.
Sure. During the 2008 bank bailouts, the TARP bill, as well as all the extension of credit by the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world, I knew I was against the bank bailouts. Then I saw Ron Paul and Peter Schiff that fall talk about them, and I witnessed John McCain suspending his campaign to go back to D.C. to rally support for the bank bailouts. And him and Senator Obama both ended up voting for them. So that's when I kind of realized they were all the same, although I didn't really realize that until 3 or 4 years later. But that is when I became a libertarian. I started a college libertarian club the next year in 2009, the Lafayette College Libertarians, who are still around as far as I know. And I've been involved in the Palm Beach County chapter, Palm Beach County affiliate of the Libertarian Party of Florida. I've been in leadership here. I've been in leadership at the state level. I've been the chair of the convention committee at the Libertarian Party of Florida, and I did serve 4 years on the Palm Beach Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Supervisors. It was a nonpartisan seat, but I was elected as a public official.
Okay, so getting to the point that I was going there, what I see with Republicans and Democrats is they have no clear, coherent answer about what to do about a world of self driving cars. I think a good example would be Andrew Yang, who thinks self driving cars are going to take away jobs, so we need to give people money, which is not a libertarian answer. I don't think I've seen much in the way of answers, really meaningful answers or discussion from Democrats and Republicans. What do you see as the what's likely to happen with Democrats or Republicans in power, Democrats and Republicans in power in the future versus what would happen with a libertarian society?
Well, self-driving cars might be one technology in the future that will reduce one type of specific job, that being taxi cabs, Uber, possibly, or it could reduce that because there could be a lot of cars that would just be, for rent because you could just drive them. That it could drive itself. So I think there's likely, because it's going to be a seen misfortune for a group of people that have some power and some sympathy from the public. I think legislators will. I don't know how they'll try to protect them. They could try to protect them by just banning self-driving cars. They could come up with some bogus government research, and in a federal court that might have some monopoly rule. They might not even be allowed to bring in private research, like what happened in the Ammon Bundy case, the Bundy Ranch. But I don't know. I There might be some sort of clampdowns and regulations just for protection of that group that people perceive need to be protected.
Okay, so one of the things I see is if you look at the history of Uber and Lyft, Uber comes along, the taxi companies don't like it, and they use their connections with Republicans and Democrats, uh, the the kleptocracy I like to refer to them, and they basically the elected officials in a variety of places put roadblocks. Right now in California, we're going to talk about Judge Jim Gray later. Judge Jim Gray lives in California, and he said that in California, they've changed the labor rules to require Uber and Lyft to treat their drivers as employees, and that's really
Hmm.
messing up how things work. I believe Mark and I both live in Florida. I believe still in the Florida Keys, I think Uber might be illegal. I don't remember exactly.
That might be true. I'm not
I know
sure.
Broward County
But
restricted it. I know a lot of places restricted Uber.
Broward banned it. They eventually rescinded the
Yeah,
ban, but Palm Beach had either banned it or they had temporarily banned it or they were talking about banning it. But yes, both counties, it was very bad 4 years ago, something like
yeah.
that. Hmm.
So um, I think it's likely that Democrat and Republican governments are more likely to interfere. And let me be clear, I believe that self driving cars, and particularly something called robo taxis, which is like Uber without the driver, so it basically cuts the cost of Uber in half. And then when you add in that they're electric vehicles and they're more efficient, and future iterations will be even more efficient, you're going to see massive reductions in costs. It's going to make life better for many people who can't afford to own a car, who have limitations in their ability to drive, whether it's because they have a drunk driving conviction and we don't want them on the road, or because they have a disability. It's going to make life a lot easier and cheaper for a lot of people, and that's why government will get in the way.
Right. I agree.
Okay.
The the cost would definitely go down, and more people would be able to do more with what they have across the board. So it would benefit most people in general at the immediate short-term expense of the Uber drivers who no longer have a
Right.
job.
Okay. So let's get into the meat of what this call is about. This live stream is about. Mark and I have followed the Libertarian presidential nomination process. Um, it's been a bit of a ride. There's been a lot of different things going on. I personally have been underwhelmed by most of the candidates. I'm a little enthusiastic about a few candidates in different ways. And the late entry of Justin Amash, who we'll talk about first. If you look at the bottom of the screen, for those who can't see, this is Jacob Hornberger, who has been the leading candidate. This is Justin Amash, who is a congressman, the first libertarian congressman in the United States history. Although I think a lot of people in the early days of the Republic were actually sort of libertarian, but the first Libertarian Party member. This is Judge Jim Gray, who I'm a fan of. He appeared on my YouTube channel recently. In 1992, as a sitting judge, he spoke out against the war on drugs, and was he the 19? We'll talk about him later. The boot here, because of the way my thing is set up, that's the top of the Vermin Supreme picture, which we'll talk about later. And I can no longer reach out because Mark's in my way. Next is a woman named Jo Jorgensen, who was the Harry Brown's vice presidential candidate in 1996, I think. Something like that. She was a libertarian candidate for vice president. Next to her is Adam Kokesh, who has some degree of notoriety. I'm actually, if there's anyone I'm a fan of, it's probably Kokesh. Not as a presidential candidate, but I'm a fan of him otherwise. Next to him is Dan Taxation is Theft Berman, who's wearing the Taxation is Theft hat. And then John Monds. We're going to talk about all of them. We're going to start with Justin Amash. Justin Amash is a sitting U.S. congressman, a registered Republican. He was a registered Republican, was elected as a Republican. I believe he got involved through the Ron Paul movement and became somewhat. I consider him probably the most honest person in Washington D.C. That's just my view of him. Fair or not, he's whenever that he votes, he puts on Twitter how he voted and why he voted that way, and I think that stands out as something different that you don't see from a lot of people in Congress. And he changed. He got very upset with Donald Trump. I would say in the last year or so. I don't know if it's more than a year. He changed his voter enrollment to independent at first, and then approaching recently, he changed his voter enrollment to libertarian, and announced he announced a exploratory committee to consider running for president on the libertarian line. So, what do you think about Amash? And just your general thoughts first, and we'll talk a little bit more about him.
Sure. My general thoughts about Justin Amash. Look, I think Ron Paul captured it best within the last week or two. Ron Paul was very complimentary toward him. Ron Paul will disagree with a few things here and there with Justin Amash, but he's a really, really principled person. When you look at his voting record, it's generally very, very good. I know some libertarians, including myself, were not very big on the impeachment. Many of us would have wanted to impeach Trump for other things, but I don't hold that against Justin Amash. That he voted for impeachment. If that's one of the only couple things that libertarians have to hold against him, I mean, I think that's kind of ridiculous if they're using that as such a strong negative against him. He's very fiscally conservative. He's pro-life, which I actually support, but It's not very relevant to the party either way, I don't think. But he is perceived by many as our best chance to be taken seriously in this election. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think that's a legitimate thing to believe. But I can just say his voting record and generally speaking, his rhetoric is very libertarian until recently. I've been disappointed in his rhetoric recently. It's become very generic, I think. Third party, people should have more choices good, Constitution. Those things are great, but nothing to do with libertarianism.
So we have a history. You can hear me, right? I just tweeted. I messed around with my microphone. We have a history
I
in the
can.
Libertarian Party of nominating people who many libertarians think is not very libertarian. I think Gary Johnson is a prime example of that. I think Bob Barr is probably the worst example of that, where we take people who are, GOP light and make them the candidate. Like, so I particularly was not happy with Gary Johnson. I felt Gary Johnson was a really weak libertarian. Amash, I think, is actually one of the issues for those who don't follow libertarian politics is they're sort of like everybody thinks that nobody else is a libertarian, that I'm the only true libertarian and everybody else is not libertarian enough. And so one of the knocks on Gary Johnson, and I share this knock on Gary Johnson, and one of the knocks on Amash is, oh, you're not a real libertarian. Where like Jacob Hornberger, who's here in the video, Jacob Hornberger is sort of like a really long-time libertarian. He runs Freedom some foundation. He's really got a pretty credible I'm the true libertarian position. So does Joe Jorgensen, and so does Kokesh to some extent. Then you get within what's the right kind of libertarian you could get into with Kokesh. But for me, Amash is much more libertarian than Gary Johnson. He's he's more of a constitutionalist, but the people who wrote the Constitution were pretty libertarian. And there's
Hmm.
moments where he might disagree with us on some issues. My biggest concern about Amash, which I think you may have mentioned, is he's not a very dynamic speaker. So, Adam Kokesh is a dynamic speaker, but he scares people. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know that anybody on the libertarian ticket is a dynamic. Any of these candidates are a dynamic speaker. I was hoping because he gets some national media attention, Amash, but he doesn't. My biggest thing. This is going to come up again and again, and Dan Berman's the only guy who really satisfies this. My biggest thing is you got to have a slogan. It could be "I'm with her." It could be "Lock her up." It could be,
It could be stop wasting
well,
money.
"Stop wasting money's mine." I get that. That's the one I think the Libertarian Party should adopt because, of course, it's mine, and I'm right. So of course I'm right. So it must be my way. But I just mean, if you look at successful candidates, they usually have some sort of tagline that they repeat with frequency,
Hmm.
and I don't hear that. It's one of the things I hated about Gary Johnson. If you ask a libertarian candidate to reduce themselves to a 3-word, 4-word, 5-word phrase, and it really shouldn't be more than 4, to be clear, but the Gary Johnson phrase would be fiscally conservative and socially tolerant, which that really gets the people moving. I think stop wasting money. You could say, stop wasting money. You can say that with punch. You can't say fiscally conservative and socially tolerant with punch.
Hmm.
And to me, it has to resonate with voters. So the problem we're going to talk about Dan Berman later, the problem with taxation is theft is it resonates with libertarians and no one else. And,
Right.
I agree. I actually think that taxation is theft isn't, we'll talk about that later. But so is Justin Amash going to come up with a 3-word phrase, a 4-word phrase? The best I've heard is those guys are old and demented and I'm normal. Is I'm normal the tagline for his campaign? I don't know. Do you?
I don't know, but we know that you don't have to be normal to win. Donald J. Trump is the president.
Yeah, no.
So,
But
not saying it precludes somebody from winning. Precludes somebody, it might not, but I don't
do
know.
you see anything that Amash has done to give you a hint that he's leaning towards some kind of phrase or theme, or is it just too early?
It, I could see him picking something that's very milk toast. I could see a 3 or 4 word phrase, but without much umph behind it.
Constitutional conservative. Yeah,
At
yeah,
best, something like
yeah.
that. I could hope for something like that out of him. He wouldn't say conservative though. Now that he's in the Libertarian
Yeah.
Party.
Um, so so Now, let's get into the politics of the Libertarian Party a bit. He's not guaranteed the nomination.
Nope.
He's I think the leadership of the LNC, for those who don't know, there's a DNC and an RNC, Democratic National Committee, Republican National Committee. There's a Libertarian National Committee. It's headed by Nick Sarwark. I think there's some other people who are. I think a lot of the leadership thinks Amash is the best candidate, and they're gonna influence things to the extent they can towards Amash. Do you think that's true?
We've already been seeing some stuff. I haven't been following it too closely just because I don't want to be too stressed out, and it's stuff over which I have no control. But just this past weekend, I believe, the LNC had an 8.5 hour meeting to discuss the convention. A week or two prior, about 10 days or less prior to this meeting, they had another meeting in which they canceled the convention that was going to be held in Austin next week. It was going to be late next week that we were going to be nominating our candidate for president. There's going to be a little over 1,000 delegates from all over the place, but it was canceled due to the travel restrictions and due to the hotel and whatnot.
I was going to say, didn't the hotel cancel it?
The hotel had sent out emails to people who had booked rooms there, but that was an accident, and they hadn't actually canceled it. The LNC was the one who actually decided to cancel it.
Okay, and so here's what I could. Let's get into the politics of that just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an in-person convention, there are delegates who are not going to make the trip,
regardless
of virus
COVID-19 or correct.
So you're going to have a reduced attendance, and the most motivated, most passionate people are the ones who are going to show up and make the decision. If you do it over the internet, you're going to have a larger attendance, including the people who are less ideologically passionate, and that, in my opinion, would tend to favor the pragmatists who want Amash to be the candidate. Does that connect with you? Do you think the same?
It's very possible. I think there are a lot of people who, by the way, the result was that they decided on a split convention where we'll still be deciding on the presidential candidate next week online. Mm-hmm. And the goal is that that's the only agenda item, and that the only other agenda item would be the online delegation approve an in-person convention in July in Orlando. We'll see what happens, and anything can happen. But what was the point about the online the online event?
The LNC, by choosing to do it online, is influencing the outcome by.
A lot of people believe that, but there are good people who don't support Amash who also took that stance to try to be more inclusive. But what you said, I think, is very possible and very likely.
Okay, so. Are there any particular positions Amash takes that are anti-libertarian that you see?
Until recently, not a whole lot. I think he's been very good on the House floor and in House votes, but recently, he explicitly has not opposed appropriations directly to people from Congress, right? Stimulus or bailouts of individual, whatever, because people are without work, partially due to government-forced shutdowns. But he has explicitly said that he thinks that these appropriations should be going directly to the people and not to big businesses, not to big banks. He didn't say we should appropriations, but he didn't say he implied that we should, although he might not believe that. He might believe that they are inevitable.
Yeah.
In which case he's playing this route, but your guess is as good as mine as far as how he actually feels.
Right. So my theory on that is, well, number one, he voted against it.
He voted against a couple of the big bills lately, yes.
I thought he voted against the big $2.2 trillion CARES Act.
I think so.
And I think Thomas Massey, who's another libertarian-leaning Republican, voted against it. And Massey was the one who tried to force the vote on the House floor. But I believe that,
there were only a handful of voice votes against it too.
And I listened to Amash very carefully in a couple of his interviews, and I never heard him say the government should give money to people. What I heard him say was this was going to happen anyway. I didn't say it that way. He didn't say it the way I would have liked him to say it, which is, well, we shouldn't be doing this, but given that we are doing this, we should do it right. It would have been nice if he had said it that way, and that would have appealed to us.
Right.
But I think I think it's insane. And let's be clear about this. I think it's insane for the government to just print money and hand it to people. This is like we could get into the poli side of this. And I did a video on this. I think we're headed to a very dangerous place where we could very well not only crash the economy but send our economy into a hyperinflation, and crash the republic, and cause some kind of revolutionary change that could be good but is more likely to be bad. Between the end of the Weimar Republic, the Russian Revolution, and the French Revolution, none of those was really very good for people.
Correct.
So
Be very scary.
And when we talk about Kokesh later, I think Kokesh is the guy to lead the Libertarian Party after the collapse when the revolutions are starting.
Maybe.
He's not. Well, we'll talk about him later. So, all right. I think we've covered Amash enough. I think he's probably most likely to get the nomination based on what we've seen. But let's turn to the guy who has the most votes so far. Let's talk about Jacob Hornberger. So I'm going to move Amash out of the screen, folks. And this is Jacob Hornberger. Jacob Hornberger is a longtime libertarian activist. Let me see if I can put him on top. He's a longtime libertarian activist. What is it called? The Future Freedom Foundation, something like that?
That is correct. The Future Freedom Foundation, FFF.
So he's, I would say he's been very, very pro-libertarian and very, very good on libertarian issues in terms of what he said for a very long time. He's sort of the purist. There's a couple other people who are more purist, but he's kind of the pure libertarian.
He's not an anarchist, but he's a radical minarchist. And he's been around since the 90s at least.
Let's just take that for a second, because I've been in both of those.
Sure.
And people might not know what that means. So a minarchy is the smallest government necessary to keep things going, and making sure that the government stays very, very small. And anarchism is not people running around killing each other, but a belief that we should not have rulers.
Anarchism is all about private and voluntary law and private and voluntary rule. Certainly not necessarily about chaos. And I really am an anarchist, an anarcho-capitalist at heart. And the more and more I hear about things that almost nobody thinks could be in the private sector, the more I learn about the type of stuff that Walter Block talks about, or Robert P. Murphy talks about. I'm very amenable to the idea that defense, with insurance companies, and that private security, private dispute adjudication, all of this can already be done and is largely already being done, by the way. But anyway.
I'll just mention really quick, I came to anarchism through a friend, anarcho-capitalism through a friend, who recommended I read Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, which I find perhaps the most compelling, short explanation, not so much about why anarchism is good, but why the state is bad. It just basically he makes the moral case that there is no moral case for a state, for government rule. And really quick, I think a really good fictional novel that approaches anarchism is The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. But so Hornberger is not an anarchist. So what do you mean when you say he's a radical? I'm less familiar with radical minarchist. I think I used to be a minarchist. What do you mean when you say he's a radical minarchist?
Well, he is very in your face, and will be in the public's face if he is our nominee. And this could be a strength or weakness, that we need to abolish swaths of government programs, that we need to not phase out Medicare and Social Security, but abolish them. And I understand it scares a lot of people, but if we want to save people, save people's lives, and bring down the cost of health care, we need to abolish Medicare based on how it distorts the market for health care, how it essentially acts as a price fixer, how it eats up 40% of our health care resource, something like that, some huge amount. There's a lot of reasons, and the corruption that's involved. And so he has good points, but he is very radical about what he believes, and he's in your face, and he's not going to back down from a fight.
Okay, so let's be clear. His positions are much more, at least what he says, is much more extreme than what Amash says.
Yes.
If you asked Amash, does Article 1, Section 8 authorize Medicare, Amash might agree that it doesn't. But he's not calling to abolish Medicare in his candidacy. And Hornberger will openly say that. Do you think that in-your-face, radical minarchism scares away voters, mainstream voters.
No doubt it'll scare away some mainstream voters, but at least most of the seniors who'd be scared away from it, they're not going to vote for us anyway. So waste of time to go after them, to be honest, on these issues. They're not going to vote for libertarians. They like voting for big government. It's as simple as that.
I'm not as negative about seniors as you might be. I have a lot of friends.
I hope I'm wrong.
I mean, I would say that they're more likely to have party ID for well established, and they're more likely to either believe in the Republican Party or believe in the Democratic Party, and identify with it. But I would say seniors are more like when you look at Joseph Biden in particular. He's not there. I mean, a lot of people watching are saying, Joe Biden's done. And I think seniors are actually more likely to judge him. If they think he has dementia, they know people with dementia.
Right.
They're more likely to say, wait a minute, we need somebody. I think the Amash pitch, I'm sorry I'm going to keep coming back to Amash, but the Amash pitch, sure. These two guys aren't really capable of being president. And I am. And I almost could see how that would resonate with a senior who views himself as a lifelong Republican but can't stand Trump, or a Democrat who views himself as a lifelong Democrat, but Biden's not really up to the job. And
sure.
And Amash doesn't have the glaring negatives, even the phony alleged racism about Ron Paul. He doesn't have the glaring negatives that you're going to be able to throw at him. And I almost think okay, maybe he's viable that way. I look at Hornberger and he's just going to scare. If you tell the seniors, I'm taking away your Social Security, if he had a compromise position of, I don't know if you've ever heard my Social Security position, which is we do need to abolish it, but how we do it is we let anybody who wants to opt out and we honor everybody who stays in.
Right.
And then anybody under 50 is going to drop out and take a big increase in their paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, this was the Ron Paul position, more or less. At least allow people under a certain age to opt out. Maybe allow everybody, but at least start somewhere.
Well, it wouldn't make sense to opt out if you were 65.
Right.
But if you're under age 50 and you go, okay, I got to wait 15 or 17 years before I collect, versus I take that money and I invest it, how am I likely to do better? At a certain age, 50, 55, almost everyone's going to drop out of the system. You got to print money or borrow, whatever you got to do to keep the system alive for the next 40, 50 years as the remaining people collect. But at least you're not taking away their money. The problem is that I know seniors who think any threat to the Social Security system is evil and disastrous. So I think anything you say on that, and so Amash not even talking about it's probably safer.
Right.
So what do you like most about Hornberger?
Well, early on, he's been my candidate the whole time because early on, out of the few people that we had announced that had any legitimacy at all, he was one of the only with any legitimacy, with libertarian credentials, and somebody who I thought could talk in front of a crowd. He wears a suit. He doesn't have a goofy hat, either kind of hat. He's just a person giving an address, hardcore. Maybe he can wake people up. Ron Paul, no, he wasn't extreme like abolish Social Security tomorrow, but he was pretty extreme nonetheless about talking about maybe we need to abolish it, we need to phase it out. That's one of the things that got me on the bandwagon. His talk on entitlements, mostly his talk on the Federal Reserve and money and banking. But I think Hornberger focuses on the most important issues: the Federal Reserve and money and banking, the entitlements, education, and the foreign policy. So, withdrawing the federal government from all of this.
Do you think he has a 3-word phrase or a 4-word phrase that?
I don't think so. No.
I'm trying to think. It's one of my big things about libertarian candidates in general, not just for president. It's one of my. I think I probably said this to you before.
We're bad at marketing.
Well, the typical libertarian candidate, if you go to a county fair, right? A typical libertarian candidate has an 8.5 by 14 sheet of paper, because legal size, because letter size isn't big enough for all the ideas. It's in 10-point font, and the head margins are a ½ inch because you got to squeeze all those ideas in. And they hand it to people, and people take a really quick look, if at all, at it, and they chuck it. And I walked around the county fairgrounds with a business card that said, Warren Redlick, stop wasting money, and that was it. And it's very rare to see a libertarian candidate be able to reduce their message to something. And this is my thing. This is why I don't like taxation is theft, even though I kind of like it. It has to resonate with the voters you're trying to reach. And I don't know if I've ever told you this bit. I ran for Congress in 2002 and 2004, and this is where Stop Wasting Money came from, by the way. I'm speaking to audiences, primarily Republican audiences. I was running as a Republican. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen a stand-up comedian who's like trying out material. They take notes. They try out a joke. They look at the response. They might take notes, or they at least take mental notes. I've seen Jay Leno do it at the Hawthorne Beach Comedy and Magic Club. Not Hawthorne Beach. The Hermosa Beach Comedy and Magic Club. They take notes while they try jokes. As a political candidate, I would say, "Oh, we got to cut regulation," and the audience would go, "Oh, we need to cut spending. We need to stop wasting money defending rich countries like France." Standing ovation. Okay, I got to use that again.
Right.
Okay, and I think that's a really important. The danger of this, by the way, is if you just say things that work and you lose your principles in the process. You lose your principles in the process and you don't stand for anything anymore.
Defeated the whole purpose of running.
Yeah, well, unless the whole purpose of running was to win and not care about what happens.
Of course.
Yeah. So, but I feel like Hornberger has been speaking to audiences who are libertarian, and that doesn't hone you to speaking to mainstream audiences. And I think his pitch is, if we have a true libertarian, we'll grow the party. And I don't, Gary Johnson grew the party. I don't like Gary Johnson as a libertarian.
Gary Johnson grew the number of voters. I don't think he grew the party too much. I know a few people, definitely in Florida and elsewhere, who joined the party and joined the liberty movement in general due to Gary Johnson.
Yeah.
I know a lot more people who joined the liberty movement due to Ron Paul.
Oh, yeah, Ron Paul, definitely. And Jo Jorgensen, one of her pitches that I watched a bunch of them speak before to prepare for this conversation, she said when she was with Larry Brown, they grew the party. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's what she said.
Right. I should make mention that that Ron Paul was in the Republican Party, so I don't know how analogous the comparison would be if we had a hardcore person like Hornberger in our party. How much attention is he going to get? I don't know, but the point is that people in the liberty movement who have a solid message, at least we have some anecdotal evidence that it gets success, such as the amount of people Ron Paul attracted to the liberty movement.
Yeah, well, I would even say Ron Paul grew the Libertarian Party while not running in the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else you want to say about Hornberger before we move on?
Just that I'm still a supporter of his, but my vote can always change before the convention. And I was actually a little frustrated with him. He was wonderful at the Libertarian Party of Florida convention. He was at our debate. He deservedly won the post debate straw poll. He was great, and I'd seen only I think 2 other debates online in the last couple months. The last one I saw I think was one of several from the Libertarian Party of Kentucky, and I was a little upset at him because he was going on accusing Amash and Gray and the non-purists of actually supporting, maybe not mass murder, but that would be an example, or supporting tyranny on various issues, right? Because they might have a more incrementalist approach and aren't necessarily explicitly advocating for abolishing certain things. That doesn't mean they support the tyranny that results from it or inherent in it. It means they have a different approach at trying to get to a more libertarian world. I certainly see that. And if Hornberger wanted to make these points, he could have said, well, those policies lead to these things. He could have said that, but he was actually saying that these candidates themselves support tyranny. The way he said it, I thought, was honestly a little bit unbecoming of him and unbecoming of the type of person whom I want to be leading the liberty movement.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to Judge Jim Gray, who appeared on this YouTube channel not too long ago. And I had a really he's describes himself as an old-time Republican. He doesn't, he's definitely libertarian. He was he Gary Johnson's vice presidential nominee
in 2012.
In 2012. So this is Judge Jim Gray. He's from California, Orange County, California, I believe. I mentioned this before, but he stood up and spoke out against the drug war when it was a danger to his own career to do so. And I've always appreciated him for that. I think he's a hero. And I, this funny thing is, I got it. Probably one of the reasons I came to the Libertarian Party was just being opposed to the drug war and realizing the Democrats and Republicans support the drug war. But he started railing against it in 1992. There have been people complaining about the drug war for much longer, and it just keeps going. And you know, I don't know a lot of educated people. This is one of those things. I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. People believe we live in a democratic system. And I don't believe we live in a democratic system. Whether you call it a republican or not, there's supposed to be some sort of democratic component to our system. And my favorite example of this recently is robocalls and telemarketing. I did a poll. I run a local news website called West Boca News and Facebook page. And I did a poll um, asking people whether they would support banning telemarketing and robocalls, which libertarians, by the way, would not support banning things, but that's a whole other conversation. But it was like 96% in favor of banning and I literally get like 5, 10 telemarketing calls, robocalls a day. And I think it should be just outright banned. Even though I'm a libertarian, I think it should be outright banned.
Here's the thing is, if we're on the federal and statewide do not call lists, they're already prohibited by law from making it. These telemarketers who are going around the lists are generally scams.
Whatever it is, it's not enforced. They're getting away with it.
There's no way to enforce this. They get they
Oh
post
no!
numbers for seconds at a time or minutes at a time overseas.
Wait. I keep hearing how sophisticated the CIA and the NSA and the CIA and the FBI are. You know, either they're good at this stuff or they're not.
Or they're lying.
Right. If they're not good at it, then okay, let's be open about that. Let's have them stop spying on us. But we know that the federal government has the. I'm sorry, we're off on a tangent here. We know the federal government has claims the power to go out and arrest Julian Assange in England to bring him home for crimes allegedly committed somewhere else. If we could do that if we wanted to. And my point is that 96% of the American people want it, and it doesn't happen. And it's not like just like a little thing. Like this is an annoyance, a significant annoyance in my life, in our lives. Right. And the drug war is another example of this. I think the vast majority of educated people who put any thought into it all recognize the drug war doesn't work, and yet we still have the drug war. And the drug war goes on and on and on, and we arrest countless people, and not just black people, but black people get shot by cops in no-knock raids, and cops get shot when people shoot back during drug raids, and it's a terrible, terrible policy. And getting back to
I like Judge Gray. I supported his vice presidential candidacy in 2012. I've met him a couple times at conventions. I've seen a couple addresses he's given online and interviews and whatnot I've listened to. And I actually did listen to your interview with him. I had forgot about that until just now. But I think he's right on about a lot of issues. I think he presents a lot of issues really well. Um, I don't remember your interview, but I do remember reading recently in a libertarian group that he was actually very against jury nullification. And I was kind of surprised and shocked to hear that. Um, I think he cited, well, it could be used for, racism, or it could be used to, acquit people of lynching or something like that. I mean, it could be, just like statewide nullification could be used to support slavery, but in reality, these things haven't happened. I don't know if jury nullification has happened, but I know that, Tom Wood's book, which was on nullification, um, statewide nullification, he dispelled all the myths that the statewide nullification was for slavery or racist, whatever, when it was actually used in the opposite way. So I think Judge Gray, unfortunately, is taking a potential hypothetical and blowing it up when he's ignoring the actual help that people can get from it and have gotten before.
Okay, so I haven't heard that view of him say that. And is that part of the libertarian platform, though, that we support jury nullification?
The platform is not very long compared to other parties, which is kind of surprising because we're libertarians, but it is pretty dense with material. I'd be surprised if we don't address it, but I honestly don't know. I forget.
Okay, I don't think of that as a... And the thing with Judge Gray is...
It's not an issue for a presidential candidate, fortunately, except it would be a nice thing for somebody, once they become president, to be vocally supporting it.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think Judge Gray is a rule of law kind of guy, and a lot of people who are rule of law people don't think that jury nullification is against the rule of law. I don't agree with that.
I think it's part of the rule of law.
Yeah.
I think it's an integral part because politics. You have division of powers all along the way.
Right.
The jury is just another division of powers. If it wasn't an independent jury that could make up their mind for whatever reason they wanted, it wouldn't be an independent jury.
So I'll tell you what struck me about Judge Gray in my interview with him was it sounded like he supports. I think I asked him directly about having troops in other countries, and I think the only, to me, again, my purity, my vision of the pure libertarian, the only libertarian answer is we should not have any troops in any foreign country. And he seemed to, I think we went back and forth a little bit, and I pushed him out. He didn't really give a solid answer, but it sounded like he believes we should have troops in some foreign countries.
Yes, I remember either in your interview or in one of the debates that he was talking about, maybe withdrawing some from some places, but quote unquote being realistic. Not necessarily that we need people there for world safety, but almost more about the political realities, which I was a little disappointed in to hear that from him. But I vaguely remember.
Right, and this is one of the things that we're going to come to Kokesh later. This on Kokesh later. There are things that the president has the power to do, and there are things where the president has more power, and things like, so. For example, a president can't end Medicare.
Nope.
The Congress would
bring the troops home, though.
But the president can. President is the commander in chief, and the president's foreign power and foreign policy is plenary according to the Supreme Court. So the president can say, you know what, we're bringing all the troops home. We're bringing.
Even if it wasn't plenary, the reality is that he has control over troops who are overseas.
No,
he can bring them home.
There's two different things. There's commander in chief, and then there's foreign policy plenary power. So under the commander in chief power, he can say. I picture, like, of course, my fantasies. I'm going to run for president. I'm getting more and more motivated. It's going to be 2024, but don't let my wife know. But the first thing I would do if I won the election before I even took office, I would call the Joint Chiefs in and say, I'm going to be taking office on January 20th or 21st or whatever it is. I want plans on my desk for bringing all the troops home from every country in the world. I want those plans on my desk. And, I want you to tell me how long you think it'll take and what it's going to be. And I'm not interested in how it might destabilize some country. I just want to know practically how can we get the troops home. And if it's not on my desk on day one, you're fired. And you might want to think about who you're going to recommend for your replacement, who's willing to do this, and tell them, hey, listen, I'm going to get fired on day one. Get ready to have the plan in place that you can show this guy. And to me, that is what that's like the number one thing. I've been a critic of, long before I was a libertarian, I've been a critic of the U.S. military presence overseas. I think it doesn't make any sense. It's expensive. It exposes us to risks. And so it's one of my big disappointments with Judge Gray is that, like, how can you, and I think this is because he's an old school Republican. He's not really a libertarian. He has some libertarian leanings. He has some good libertarian ideas, but he's not really a libertarian ideology kind of guy.
I'll tell you, you're making him sound more like Bill Weld than I wanted to believe about him.
Well, I don't put him in Bill Weld's category because he's
still pro-liberty.
He's better, and he's definitely on that. It's that drug war thing from 1992 that just goes a long way with me, because that's the other thing I think the president could do is the president could say, all right, I'm not appointing anybody to head the DEA. I'm appointing somebody to head the DEA whose job is going to be to shut everything down. I'm appointing people to the DEA, FBI, every agency that investigates drug crimes, and their job is to stop it. And I'm appointing.
Can the president reschedule the
no,
different drugs?
Doesn't. But it's. I'm.
A congressional law.
I don't know the answer to that, but what I'm saying is you don't have to go there. You could. There's something called prosecutorial discretion and enforcement discretion, and you appoint people to the enforcement jobs and to the Attorney General's office, and you appoint U.S. attorneys, and you tell them, listen, the first thing I expect from you is you will not prosecute one single drug case, not one. From day one in your job, you will not prosecute a drug case. You will start working, and then I'm going to appoint like a panel to review everyone who's in prison on drug charges to see who should be released. Making sure we don't release people who are actually dangerous to society, but releasing as many people as possible.
Do you think Judge Gray would do either of these things?
I probably should have asked him about that. I think there's a chance that he would.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
I
I
agree.
mean, he's opposed to the drug war. So I do think, that's probably my number. It was my number one issue when I got involved in this stuff. It's my number two issue now. Is that we have to end the drug war. This is a disaster. We're wrecking our own society, and this is just one of the ways. But so anyway, I think we've covered Judge Gray. Let's move on.
Sure.
Let's see who we got. I got
Maybe more of a lightning rounds for the next few. We're kind of running lower on time
okay.
here.
Well, let's talk about Vermin Supreme.
Sure.
Vermin Supreme. I think we can cover quickly.
Sure.
Vermin Supreme is. I'm going to call him a comedian or a performance artist. He probably has some libertarian views, but to me, I don't think the Libertarian Party should be represented by a clown. It's not that I don't like him. It's not that I don't agree with his policy views. I'm not even sure what they are. It's just for me, it's a deal breaker. You look like a lunatic. You're not going to attract people to the party. You're going to make people think we're crazy, like the naked guy dancing on stage.
I agree with you on the optics about Vermin Supreme. Got the boot on the head and wears, literally like 10 or 20 ties. He is a political satirist. He's a very, very funny guy. Very, very intelligent. If he wasn't libertarian 10 or 15 years ago when he first started this, I don't know if he really was or not. He certainly is now. The mandatory toothbrushing and the free ponies for everybody. That's not a serious thing. Those are his main two things on his campaign. But that's just to satirize the ridiculous promises that politicians make. I appreciate his satire. I've met him many times at several LP conventions and other liberty-oriented events the last few years. Saw him at PorkFest this past summer. I told him straight up, look, you're a smart guy. I think you're really funny. I think the American people don't want to see a clown represent a political party. I think it does disservice to our party. So I wish you continue to do this, but not in our party. Do it as no party affiliation. So that's my opinion. I wish he was doing this without party affiliation.
Okay.
I will say it did make the Libertarian Party of Florida debate a little bit more enjoyable, and it was enjoyable to begin with. But he is a funny and smart guy.
Okay.
So if you listen to the LPF debate, you'll get his jokes, and very, very bright guy.
Okay, so let's move on from him. Joe Jorgensen, I would say, is a fairly serious candidate and a very solid libertarian, but I don't know her as well as you do. So tell us more about her.
Oh, you might know her better than I do. I've only seen her, at our state party convention and probably in 2018 and maybe in 2016 in Orlando. But she's been around the party a long time. She took a decade or a decade and a half off. She was working on her own stuff, family stuff, business stuff, etc. The last couple of years she's been back in. She was the vice presidential nominee, I think, sometime in the 90s.
For Harry Brown, yes.
For Harry Brown, and everybody loved Harry. I don't know anybody who has anything negative to say about her. Very positive. If she was our nominee for president or vice president, I wouldn't be upset. She's not who I'm supporting right now, but I don't think she would be a problem representing libertarians in general and representing us in front of the public.
Okay, great. So let's move on to one of my favorite people in the liberty movement, even though not my favorite presidential candidate, is Adam Kokesh.
By the way, I couldn't have said that better myself.
I love Adam. I think he's got tremendous fire. Adam is a veteran. I don't know if this picture is backwards for people who are watching, but hang on a second. Sorry. Yeah, I think the picture's backwards for some reason. That must be a feature of how I'm doing this. It says Iraq Veterans Against the War on his T-shirt. Adam fought for the United States of America. I think he basically realized that what we were doing was wrong. But he's gone... My problem with Adam is he's kind of gone over the deep end into... Like, I think the first thing he says is, the first thing I'll do as president is abolish the federal government.
That is his entire platform.
And it's...
Correct.
I've read the Constitution, Article 2, which covers the executive branch, and that's not one of the powers that the president has. That's what I was talking about before. The president could order the troops home. The president could appoint people who will not enforce the drug war. There's a lot of things a president could do. He doesn't have the power to abolish the federal. It would basically, he would be abdicating, and then the vice president would come in, and then the vice president presumably would abdicate, and then the Speaker of the House, who's a Democrat or Republican, would take over.
I think you're correct that there is no constitutional authority. I think that what he has told me, or I've heard in videos, whatever, and I've met him many times, is that he would believe that if he was elected president, he would have had enough people vote for him that now he has a mandate. to do so politically. So I know it doesn't really conform with the rule of law, but I think that he may have also referred to to the Declaration of Independence, right to alter or abolish the government. If he were to get legitimate electoral votes, not due to something being swung to the House, but actually winning, 25 states or 30 states or something, can he appeal to the Declaration of Independence? It's an argument.
Yeah.
I I'm not saying right or wrong. I think it's a non-starter for the American people, though, so I don't think it gets him
No,
anywhere.
and I think he's of all the candidates we talked about. To me, he's the most charismatic. He's the guy who could deliver a line. He's the guy who could, like I want to be the candidate myself, but I recognize, Amash has got more gravitas. I recognize Kokesh is more charismatic. Different people have different strengths, and
Let me say, Kokesh has gotten so good at
yeah,
communication in the last 10 years or so. He was used to be kind of a hothead and maybe get into arguments, whatnot. He is so very good at nonviolent communication and talking to people, going to their level. He does in a different way than Larry Sharp, but that's another great gem of the Liberty Movement as far as communication. So Kokesh has a more radical message, but I think he presents his very radical message. If people bother to listen to him for 30 seconds, they will listen even more.
yeah. And anyway, I love the guy, and like I said before, if what I fear is going on in America today happens, and there's an economic collapse, and the result of the economic collapse is revolutionary movements start, and there's going to be a far left socialist communist movement, and there's going to be a far right fascist movement. We need a liberty movement to counter those two, and Adam Kokesh, to me, would be far and away the best leader of a liberty movement to counter those two and say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want Nazis, we don't want Stalin, we don't want Hitler. Let's go with George Washington.
I'll tell you, Adam Kokesh and also Eamon Bundy.
Yeah.
I would also, I think he would be. There would probably be a few people who we could look to lead,
Yeah.
all together, in
Yeah.
fact. But
Okay,
anyway,
so moving on. Next is, I think, a fairly credible. I think you know more about him than I do. The picture I have here makes him look a little bit like a clown, but I don't think that's fair. But he wore it, so he chose it. So he's wearing the taxation is theft hat. I'm just going to say I think that's a meek and mild position. Taxation is armed robbery. If you don't pay your taxes, men with guns will come and they will take your money. So it's not
it's
it's
extortion.
not theft. It's armed robbery. It's extortion. Theft is just a misdemeanor. Armed robbery is a felony. So, but it's a good tag. I love the tagline. I love having a tagline. My big beef with that is I don't think it resonates with voters. But what do you think about Berman?
He's another smart person that once you hear him talk, very reasonable, and I mean he's very radical as far as he'll go out of his way to talk about abolishing taxes, but as far as he has a very positive message for liberty, and he does present himself as a clown simply by the hat, and that he says he has changed his name legally to Dan Taxation is Theft Berman. So his name is not Daniel Berman. Apparently, it's Dan Taxation is Theft
So you're
Berman.
saying,
I don't know if it's
uh,
I don't know if it's legally done or not, but that's what he says his name
so you're
is.
saying when I run for president in 2024, I should change my name to Warren Stop Wasting Money Redlick.
It would be analogous. I'm not saying you should, but it would be analogous.
Okay, so is Berman getting any traction with the voters and the libertarian delegates?
Not that I remember, because we've had a crowded primary. It's there. There were a lot of people who were good who didn't get too many votes in at least our straw poll. I haven't been following the straw polls and debate results too closely, but I don't think he's gotten much traction. But he's well known in the party, and he's a good presenter, except for his hat. And he is very well spoken. I will say that.
Okay, so let's move on to the last guy on my list, which is John Monds. I know virtually nothing about him. What can you tell me about him?
John Monds is in Georgia, and he did run as a libertarian for something, maybe statewide, maybe it was a state legislative office or a state bureaucratic office, I forget. He did get, I think, more, better vote returns than any other libertarian in Georgia ever had, I believe. I hadn't even known him up until the 2020 LPF convention here in Orlando. but he was one of the debaters, and he was fantastic. He had a great way of, I forget the examples, but there were a couple things that their state was dealing with that he actually had proposed solutions to. I forget if his solutions were adopted, but he has a very good way of presenting specific solutions to specific problems. I remember that, and he has a track record with successful vote getting in Georgia. He may have actually served in a position. I honestly forget.
Okay, and he doesn't have a lot of traction in this libertarian campaign, right?
At the Libertarian Party of Florida convention, I think he was the second most vote
Oh yeah.
getter in our straw poll, behind Jacob Hornberger, I believe. I want to say no to none of the above was third in that. So, they all got in the upper 20s or mid to upper 20s, and everybody else was like 10 or less, pretty much.
Okay.
So he definitely impressed the Libertarian Party of Florida delegation, enough so that a lot of us had approached him and asked him if he would actually want to be Jacob Hornberger's running mate, if he didn't get the nomination. And if I remember, he didn't reject it. I think he'd be open to it, but I honestly forget.
Okay, so I'm going to move him off the screen, and just let's we got about it's about 5 minutes to 8 o'clock. I'm assuming you have a life to get back to. I want to mention first, Mark is the owner of Taggart Trading. He trades gold and silver coins and bullion. Can you tell people a little about what you do with Taggart Trading? And this is not a. We've talked about Mark potentially sponsoring my channel, but he's not a sponsor yet. So this is not paid. Mark, tell him a little about your business.
I buy and sell physical gold and silver, and platinum for that matter. Also rare coins and numismatics, old American and Confederate States of America paper money. So whether it's collectible or just the bullion type stuff, if you want to invest in gold or silver or platinum, or you have some metal that you need to liquidate, or you just would rather have cash, I'm always buying, I'm always selling. I, give free evaluations for entire collections or for any specific item, bullion item, coins, whatever. Certified coins, uncertified coins, U.S. and foreign. I'm not an expert in foreign coins, but certainly generic foreign I can handle no problem. Foreign exchange as well, for the common types of currencies I can handle. So people can always email me or call me, and I'm here to give free good advice and to do business with low premiums and low spreads, if you want to do business.
Okay, and it seems to me that coins, gold and silver, precious metals, that's something that has appeal to the libertarians. Why is that?
Certainly, it's an alternative to the fiat U.S. dollar and to the banking system in general. It's
What does that mean? What I know what it means, but for people who don't know, what is a fiat U.S. dollar?
Sure. So fiat money is simply put government ordained money, currency or money that it only has that status because the government gives it that status. Um, Fiat money these days is almost entirely fake paper money with nothing backing it. Fiat money doesn't have to be unbacked paper money, but these days that's in effect what it is.
Okay, in the past, our money was tied to gold.
Correct. So you could still say it was a fiat money to the extent that the government was fixing gold to $20.67 an ounce and issuing dollar gold, higher denomination gold certificates, lower denomination silver certificates, and Federal Reserve notes, and Federal Reserve Bank notes, and national bank notes, and legal tender notes, all just claims on real money, which was gold. So while it was fiat money, it was still based on market money, because if the only price fix in the economy is, let's say, the government fixing the price of the dollar to gold, and then all other prices can freely float, well, that's not price fixing in effect, not in any bad sense. As long as the government can always come up with the gold to redeem your claims on the gold, there's no problem. And I think it would create a lot more sustainable system.
Okay, so I think there are libertarians. I'll take my take. Libertarians tend to be attracted to gold and silver, partly because some of the leaders of the libertarian movement, the Ron Pauls, the Adam Schiffs, talk about it.
Peter Schiff.
Sorry, Peter Schiff. Thank you,
Peter
thank you. Peter would be mad at me for that if he knew who I was. I think that we don't trust government to control money. That's why we're libertarians, and it's one of the fundamental things that government does that it shouldn't do is control money. So, and we historically, gold and silver have been money, have been a form of money. Was that fair? Would you say government gold and silver were a form of money?
Oh, absolutely. Both government gold and silver, as well as non-government gold and silver, have both been money. In fact, the most circulating currency, which was also money, in the times of the American Revolution was the Spanish milled dollar, the Spanish 8 reals coin. When people say pieces of eight, that's an 8 reals, or a piece that was broken off of an 8 reals Spanish coin or Spanish colonies coin. So it can be foreign governments, it can be privately minted, but it's definitely been money in the past.
Okay. Well, listen, Mark, thank you for speaking with me. And we'll see. I know we picked Thursday evening. Might not be the best time to do a live stream. If we do it again, maybe we'll do it on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. I think the time I was looking at YouTube, and those are better times to do it. But we'll see how this does, and I look forward to seeing. And you're a delegate to the Libertarian National Convention.
I am,
Okay.
and we'll see if we have this presidential nomination and any other business in, I think, a week. We'll see if I'm able to successfully log in and actually, check in as a delegate and vote. They have me down as a delegate, but the tests that the LP have run the last couple times, I've heard, have not been good.
Okay.
So I'm not holding my breath for this nomination happening in a week, but we'll see. I will be at the physical convention and the call-in convention to the extent that we have either and that I can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark.
You got it. Have a great night, Mark.